Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, the first race of the season is finally done, the Bahrain Grand Prix. And we have some thoughts.
Yeah, there was... It's funny because I feel like some people looked at this and saw this as not the most exciting race. I mean, I'm sure for, like, if this is your first race ever.
Yeah.
You know, and especially since I feel like the first race of the season, a lot of people expect, like, massive crashes or just, like, the cars to shit the bed. And I feel like, thankfully, we didn't see that. But technically, this was a mess for so many people.
Yeah. And so, as you guys know, we did not start watching F1 until the middle of last season, the beginning of the middle of last season. So we've never seen the very beginning of a season. So this is our first time ever watching the first race of the season. And we're not sure if it's like this every year where people are kind of just trying to figure out their cars before they go all out. But, yeah, I feel like a lot of people didn't even go... Yeah, obviously they were pushing because they want to win and they want to get the highest place possible. But I almost feel like they were nervous to push too hard because they don't know the limits of the car yet.
I disagree. I feel like they were all pushing their hardest. I just think, like, they just learned all the issues with the car. You know, that they were pushing the car to the ultimate speed that they could, which ended up for some people not being a lot of speed.
That's true.
And I feel like pushing it to the max, like in this race setting that they're going to be in, I feel like this is where you're gonna, like, you can only execute so much through practice. I feel like it's not until that first race run that you actually see everything that's falling apart.
Yeah, 100%.
So definitely, I mean, if you didn't watch practice, I think, and you came in from last year and you just watched the race, definitely some surprises. I think there's some teams that have a lot to do.
Yeah, I would say some surprises, but also the results were not even surprising at all.
They were typical, but I think it's I guess I'm more talking about, like, the lower half of the grid. I think that there's been some movement in the second half that I'm surprised by. Two teams in particular.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would agree with that.
But yeah, I mean, I think for it being the first time we're watching it, I mean, we watched a bit of preseason testing, not a ton, but then watching this whole weekend compared to, you know, the last weekend we watched where, you know, the execution is completely different. But I'm kind of excited to see
the progression,
the improvement. You know, I'm excited to see which teams, because, like, last year, you know, we heard Aston Martin started off so well, but we didn't see it until the middle when they were in the middle, you know? So it's exciting that we're starting where you should start from.
Yeah, 100%. All right, we're going to do our normal structure where we go over practice. We do a track. We go over the track real quick. It's been a little while since we've done, it's been, 3 months since the last race?
Yeah.
So go over the track really quickly, and then we're going to go into just a quick pre-practice conversation, then into quali, and then we'll end on about, like, a 20-minute discussion about the race.
Cool.
So, yeah, let's get into it.
This is a new racetrack for me, because, like we said, we didn't watch this last year.
This was the 20th anniversary of this race, though.
That was in my notes. I was going to get to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I stole it from you.
It's all right. So the official race name for this weekend was the Formula One Gulf Air Bahrain Grand Prix 2024. They did show a quick little, like, snippet of, like, all the cool things that they do in the beginning, and apparently they had a Gulf Air plane fly, like, very close, which, for me, I was like, We're really hitting that net zero, guys. Yeah. But yeah, so Lenovo hasn't shown up yet. I'm sure they will, guys. Don't worry. The first F1 Grand Prix for Bahrain was held in 2004, and like Emma said, this was their 20th anniversary, which I think is pretty cool. I think Fernando Alonso was there.
They kept asking him about
first Bahrain.
They really love to make him feel old.
Yeah, they really just, like, love to dig it in deep, which, you know, old, he's not even that old. The circuit length is 5.412 kilometers or 3.362 miles, and then the race distance is 308.238 kilometers or 191.53 miles. So pretty typical. As, you know, we've seen last season, all of these kind of range within the same miles. There's not, like, a very large, it's not like you're going to have one that's, 10 miles long.
Oh, yeah, God, no.
There are some that are significant, like the older ones are a bit shorter. And then the number of laps to hit that race distance, they have to complete 57 wraps. Can you imagine? Laps. The lap record was placed in 2005 by Pedro de la Rosa. He was driving for McLaren, and he did a lap in 1 minute and 31 seconds, 31.447.
So you keep saying, I have asked Mary Catherine about 3 or 4 times this entire weekend that, like, is it the same, like, track? Is it the same layout as when he set that record? Because I thought I heard Alex Jakes or Will Buxton say that it wasn't the same layout as it was back then.
I'll have to double check because, just because this was the first Grand Prix and personal life, there was other stuff going on. I didn't do as much of, like, in-depth into the circuit as I have before. So I'm not exactly sure if the layout has changed. From what I saw,
at least in the last few years it hasn't.
But I'll have to double check on that. But this is the record. This is the record that's still in place. I feel like a lot of times if the circuit has changed, like in Mexico, the circuit has changed. There's, like, the lap record can't, like, it wouldn't be the same lap record.
Yeah.
But, again, I didn't do the research, so I don't want to sit there and be like, it's never changed. And they're like, it actually changed, like, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah. And, I don't know. I'll go over the fastest lap time when we get to the race. But, like, I want to know how he hit that. Because that's the thing for me, too, is, like, how did you... maybe it was, like, the perfect amount of wind and the perfect car.
Yeah,
and, like, who knows? But that's the lap record, still in place since 2005. There are 15 turns on this circuit, and then there are 3 DRS zones. So DRS detection zone 1 starts before turn 1, and then activation starts after turn 3, and then DRS detection zone 2 starts before turn 9, activation starts after turn 10, and then DRS detection zone 3 starts before turn 14, and activation begins after turn 15 in that, start-finish straight, which we typically see. I liked this. I feel like this circuit, I think the biggest issue that we saw was within turn 1. There was, the immediate, after the start, there was an incident. We'll get into it, but I think turn 1's probably going to be the biggest struggle that most of the drivers were having, especially with that pit exit right there.
Yeah.
So, I thought it was really cool. It looked incredibly bumpy. That was
I don't think any
thing.
of the drivers looked like they were having a great time.
Yeah, that was one thing I think I noticed. And again, we haven't watched the beginning of the season. It just seemed like the cars were just back and forth. It was a spark show the whole time.
It almost seems like they haven't figured out what height they need their cars to be at yet.
Which, maybe that's a beginning season
It would have been really interesting to see if they had measured, like, the planks underneath the car. Because I feel like we saw more sparks today than we did at COTA last year when Lewis and Charles when apparently they were under what they need to be. Yeah. I feel like if they had done that test today, like, all of the cars would have failed.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. It definitely seemed sparkier than, the races we watched last year.
There was even one person's car. It was Lewis's
car that
underneath went on fire.
Yeah.
Damn.
So, I don't know, maybe they're just testing their limits, seeing, it's a new build, a new chassis, seeing what they can do. I think that is my biggest takeaway from this weekend is that it felt like, while it was a Grand Prix,
it was almost like a test.
It was like an extension of, like, testing, just because there were so many issues with the cars, but then also it just seemed like, realistically, they've only had, like, 5 days in the car prior.
Yeah, not even.
3 days of preseason testing and then a day and a half.
They've had a total, I think each driver, so all the free practices are 3 hours long.
15 hours in the car.
And yeah, which is
'cause it's 3
if they did all of that.
Each drive. Well, that's the thing. If they were in the car for all 4 hours, which none of them were.
Yeah.
So that's 3 4-hour sessions plus 3 1-hour practices. So
if they were so let's say they split it up. Because most of the teams did split up preseason testing. So then 6 hours per driver, in preseason testing because it's 4 hours each day. Plus, so they each only really have 9 hours in the car before they have to go to qualifying.
Well, and like that's the thing. Like, I mean, they have simulations. Like they have all the sim runs and stuff. No, and I know that, but like I think that shows you what like this weekend. So many things can go wrong. You know.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out so many things within this time frame that, I don't know, it was really interesting to me. I thought it was an incredibly interesting weekend. Like, from a technical standpoint.
We also got to see all of the cars and all the new things that the teams are bringing in action. So getting to see the weird sort of not really side pods that Red Bull has, where like you don't see the opening in the front of the side pods that you do for every other team. You got to see how
the Alpine nose.
Yeah, the Alpine nose, which was gigantic. The Mercedes front wing, how it's got the 4th layer, but like it's on like half of it's not actually there.
Yeah, I mean
it was really interesting.
And it was really cool too because you saw all the livery releases like over the month of February, but then you finally got to see the cars like on the track. You know.
Might I add, I know people are making fun of Steak, Kick, F1, Sauber.
We'll call them Sauber.
Yeah.
We're gonna call them Sauber.
Everyone was making fun of their neon green.
I thought it looked amazing. Awesome. Well, because the thing is, and hot take, I don't know if this is a hot take, I'm so visually, like, I could tell, okay, that's Sauber.
Yep.
Like, the problem is there's so many blues and silvers and carbon fiber that you can't tell the cars sometimes when there's, like, the mad the mad rush of the start that you can't even tell. And so, I don't know. I love it. Like, I think it is visually, it's going to be great in night races. I think it really makes them pop. I mean, besides them, the only other people that really pop out is Ferrari with the red, you know, and then everyone else is like different shades of navy.
Yeah. And McLaren even doesn't even have as much orange on the cars.
It's because there's so much, so much carbon fiber now. But yeah. So that's the track.
We'll get into free practice now.
Yeah.
So, free practice 1, just before I get into the free practices, they were pretty boring. There was, like, barely anything that was actually going on. But I just want to go over, like, what people placed in during free practice, because it was kind of different than usual. And again, everyone's going to be running different practice plans, but I still want to go over that. So,
the other thing is, too, is people are running different practice plans, but one thing to note that a lot of people were commenting was a lot of the teams were holding their cards, like, close to their chest. So you weren't seeing their full, like, capacity.
Apparently all the Honda engines were
lower.
Not going to the full, like, they weren't
capacity.
at high power. Yeah.
For most of the practices. And so it was interesting because I think seeing the practices and going into qualifying, and then going into the race, I think we fully expected there to be toss-ups.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not what ended up happening. But I agree with you. I think the practices, again, they're practice, so they're not racing.
You can't pay such close attention to a practice in the sense that, like, that's going to be the result of the race.
But I think it kind of gave us the hope that maybe Red Bull would struggle more.
I think it gave everybody the hope that Red Bull was going to struggle a bit more than they did last year, but that was, in fact, incorrect.
A joke.
So for FP1, one of the things that Max was saying, he kept saying that he was frustrated and that the car was, quote-unquote, miles off. Mm-hmm. And so hearing that and seeing that he wasn't in the top 3, I was like, wow, did Adrian Newey screw up for, like, the first time ever? Is it a bad... No, not bad, but, like, is it just an okay car? based on the race results, it's a great car.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
But the results of FP1 were Danny, then Lando, then Oscar and Yuki. So I was like, pack it up. We're good to go home. That's great.
I think it also really put a light, like it shined a light on RB.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people were kind of expecting them to be at the end of the pack where they were last year, and then to come in, the joke was, like, did they just give them
the RB19?
19, like, and maybe it's just a good car this year, but I think that was
I think it's an okay car.
Yeah.
I think practice gave people too much hope that it was going to be really good. But race results, it was just an okay car. FP2, nothing really went on. The results were Lewis, George, Fernando, and Carlos. So this was really the beginning of seeing the Ferraris do pretty well. I'd say the Ferraris were pretty consistently good throughout the whole weekend. I'm predicting that Ferrari is going to come second in the Constructors this season. I think it's going to be Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren. And then I think Aston Martin and Mercedes are going to be fighting for fourth. I had a friend who said that they think that it's going to be Mercedes and McLaren fighting for third. I think it depends on how the upgrades go for each team, to be honest. I hate to say it. I think the person that's going to drag Mercedes down and going to be the reason why they don't get third is because of Lewis. I hate to say it. I just don't think the cars that they have been developing have agreed with him.
I don't know if the cars were exactly the same this weekend. I don't know. I feel like, I feel like George is kind of, it's something we've kind of discussed. I don't know if we talked about in the last episode, but I also feel like there is this insurmountable amount of pressure on George right now to be the team leader. It was this
they literally asked Lewis about it in the
and I think
conference.
I think that maybe this is that role that, we joke about it. George always gives that, like, motivational speech, that dad energy of, like, come on, guys, we can do it if we just do it, and I feel like maybe this is that motivation, that push that George needed.
Yeah, even in the post-race interviews, Lewis was asked, like, how the car was feeling, and he wasn't positive about it. He was like, I think we've learned, we're a long way to go. And he was like, I think the interviewer asked him, like, do you think it'll be good for next weekend? He's like, sometimes I'm getting a little frustrated with Lewis at Mercedes because I think that he's frustrated.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of seeing, Lewis and Mercedes for so long had the same mindset, had the same goals. And I think for the first time, we're really seeing that, like, we saw it last year, that frustration of Lewis about the car. And I think this year there's that, like, I feel like last year he was always like, we'll fix it next year. We'll fix it next year. Whereas this year it's just like,
who knows when we're going to fix it?
Yeah, like, who knows? Because he doesn't know. Because
last year they didn't know what was wrong with the car. Yeah. They couldn't figure it out.
From what they said, though, from what he was saying, he's wanted his seat further back. They made that change for him in the car.
Yeah.
I feel like the Mercedes is going to struggle. I feel like Lewis is going to struggle. But, again, it's the first race.
Yeah. We don't know.
We literally don't know. And I just think, we'll talk about it when we get into the race, but there were issues that Lewis was dealing with that George, to our knowledge, was not. So maybe that's why he placed where he did, but
yeah.
I hope they stay positive. Yeah. I want them to end on a good note. I don't want it to be a soured relationship.
I would agree.
I don't want that drama.
I think they'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then for FP3, the results were Carlos, Fernando, Max, and then Charles. It's interesting because I feel like Fernando is doing really well in the practice sessions, but the Aston Martin, I think, is just struggling a little bit to get the speed that it did have last year at this time. I don't think it's a bad car. I think we were seeing all of the Mercedes power unit teams struggling with overheating. And in the practice sessions, you're not going to have overheating. So I'm interested to see how Aston's able to develop their car a little bit further, if their upgrades are going to move them forward or bring them backwards like it did last year. So, yeah, that is pre-practice. Should we go into quali now?
Yeah.
Awesome.
My thing with quali was that, and I don't have the times written down, the times in quali I feel like were really close.
Yeah.
What a tease for the race. What a tease. I'm sorry. Like, watching qualifying, the times were insane. Like, I feel like all 20 times were within the tiniest window.
But, okay, I will say, it does make me wonder... Does the Red Bull then, because, okay, spoiler everyone, Max won by 22 seconds.
What?
Okay. But does this mean that either the Red Bull is absolute shit at one lap pace, or everybody else is absolutely phenomenal at one lap pace? Because it's one of them. Because if Max winning by 22 seconds means that he should be much back. He should be at least a second ahead of the field on a one lap pace.
I just like they can't be like, it would be crazy if they were like doing psychological games. Like if they were like just looking at the way the field was driving and they were like, just push it that far. Like if they were like, if they knew he was that fast, like if he's not going 100% in qualifying. Like that would be, I mean,
how do you conserve your power unit then? You're not pushing it all the way all the time. You might have to be able to keep your power unit a little bit longer. It might be literally part of the strategy.
It's just, like, it just felt like, it felt like qualifying was such a tease for what the race was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
But anyways, okay, so Q1.
Okay, so Q1, the people who went out were Valtteri, Zhou, Logan, Esteban, and Pierre. Logan. So,
was this the moment where Logan was like, I don't know what happened?
Yes.
Okay. As someone who...
You've done this for a year. How do you not know what happened?
As someone who did the, like, quick sprint racing in college and, like, understanding that, like, the frustration and sometimes, like, I just... Like they said, watching F1 TV, they were like, this is not helpful. And maybe they went and they debriefed, which I'm assuming they did.
I would hope so.
They have the data.
And
they know what went wrong.
That might have been his initial reaction, like, not thinking in the car of, like, I don't know what happened because I need a second to think about it.
But I think it's because so many of the other drivers sit there and, like... I think
like you have every other driver that's like, oh, my like front and right locked up, or like my like something else happened, or blah blah blah. Like you have all the other drivers having some sort of understanding as to what happened, and I don't know if that's experience, but like I do think that Oscar would be able to say like what happened, and they have the same amount of experience.
I mean, it could just be like. It could just be the way they handle things.
It could be his personality, too. It could just mean that, like, he could just be the kind of person that's, like, he can't give the best feedback in the car.
Initially, and he needs, like, 30 minutes to, like...
He needs to sit down and think about it.
Yeah.
And, like, look at all of this, like, the data himself, and then he can figure out what happened. But, like, I don't know. I got very frustrated by that because he was on his second flying lap, and he should have been... Him and Alex
Williams had the opportunity
should have been...
Q2.
Yeah. And it was like on one of the turns, like something just happened and he ended up on the side. And then I think it was like a quick little, like he went too wide and then he's like, oh, I don't know what happened. And I think he abandoned the lap then.
Yeah, I think he made a mistake on a turn, took it too hard. Like he wasn't able to shake it off. But
I think that he has at least what we saw of him from last season and to now, I think when he makes a mistake, he has a bad habit of just being like, that's it. Like, I don't know what happened. Meanwhile, like, I think there was a flying lap that like Joe did, and he made a quick little mistake on one of the turns, and he still kept going because you never know, it could still be fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, that could just be like, that could just be the way he was, like, trained, the way he handled,
Maybe.
you know, like, who knows? Maybe, again, that could be a personality issue or just the way he is as a driver. But
Yeah.
I definitely, I'm looking at his result in qualifying and his results in the race, and I'm not worried. You know, I don't have skin in the game, but I think it is...
If it continues on this track, I think we will have seen the last of Logan.
Yeah, and I really hope that they don't do a Nick DeVries. I don't think they would. I think that the patience that the fans and the spectators have for Logan this year is going to be shorter than last year. And so I just hope that Logan and Williams are prepared.
You don't have as much room to
you're
mess
not a
up
rookie
and make bad excuses when it's your second season. You're not a rookie anymore.
And the other problem is
your rookie season is the season for you to make mistakes, and Williams gave you that time to make mistakes. Now they've invested so much money in you and giving you this seat again.
The other problem is that there are too many people
that could be in that seat.
And I think that it's business. Like,
yeah.
You're not performing, you know, in corporate America, you get cut.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that this is maybe just, you know, the first weekend blues and struggles, but I definitely gonna be keeping a close eye on his season because it's concerning.
Yeah. So Q2, we see what?
Oh my God. Sorry. Quick thing I really want to say. Esteban and Pierre, beginning of absolute dog shit for Alpine.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they told their Hollywood investors that this season's not going to be good, that, like, the money that they were given at the end of last season by, like, Travis Kelce is not really going to take effect until next year.
Because
typically once they already got these huge investments, they were already in the middle of developing their car for this year, and I think that they tried some different things, which obviously are not paying off. Like, their car is apparently 10 kilos overweight, which for the Americans, apparently that's about, 17 pounds.
Apparently their power unit's really heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see, hopefully they can turn it around, and I think that they've been upfront about it from preseason testing, that it's not going to be that fast yet, and hopes that maybe they can develop it to become faster. I think, if anything, this is going to be a dud of a season for them, and then next year they can come back and be much better.
The other thing to watch, too, is kind of like, and I don't want to say, you know, people's mentality, but I think people's mentality is something to actually really pay attention to in this sport.
Pierre and Esteban,
you know, there's always been a bit of tension between the drivers. I'm not going to dig deep because we don't know them. But I do think the way they reacted was really interesting. Esteban has kind of stepped into that leadership role and kind of, you know, when he got his results, he's like, okay, we have things to work on, we have things to improve on, and I think
it's just the first round.
You see Pierre a bit more frustrated. Now, like we just talked about with Logan, everyone has different personalities and handles things differently. But I do think, you know, I hate the whole driver 1, driver 2, but I do feel like sometimes there does have to be a driver that needs to take the initiative.
Well, and I think that you can have two drivers like Esteban and Pierre, who I think talent-wise and skill-wise are very equal, but then personality-wise, I think when it comes to like a driver 1 and driver 2, I think that can make the difference. So I think at least what we saw this weekend, Esteban is taking the lead, as in like his personality is more of the leadership chill almost.
Well, and I think the other thing is too is that yes, there are team principals and the drivers are just the drivers, but I do think that the drivers are kind of, I mean, they're the figureheads of these teams.
Yeah.
You know, they're the people that the factory does want to hear, like, that you made Esteban happy. Like, these people want to hear that they made the driver happy.
Well, and especially because it's a French company with 2 French drivers. Like, for them, I'm sure they're so proud to have 2 French drivers. They want to make everything good for them. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So Q2, we see Yuki, Lance, Alex, Danny, and K-Mag out. It wasn't really anything significant that happened during that. Well, actually, the one significant thing that happened during Q2 is that Charles's Q2 time was actually faster than Max's Q3 time, and Max ended up on pole. So that's interesting. So Charles would have ended up on pole if he had pulled that same time in Q3.
I also think the other interesting thing to note is that Nico Hulkenberg did make it to Q3. I think that for those that are new, Nico Hulkenberg driving for Haas, he is literally one of the most consistent he's literally one of the most consistent qualifiers ever. So it's definitely interesting
Yeah,
to
that was
see.
also one of the weird things. Some of the commentators were saying, they're like, "Oh, we're so surprised that Hulk made it to Q3." But I feel like he has always made it to Q3.
Well, he's literally statistically, if you look at the data, he is one of the best qualifiers ever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why people want him. Well, not, like, they're not wanting him like Max, but, like, that's why Haas has him, is because he is a good qualifier.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, Nico.
I just wonder what would happen if he were given a car that has
power.
Has good race pace, because he has the consistency to make it to Q3 for his whole career. He's always been able to do stuff like that. But he's never been in, like, a phenomenal car.
Yeah.
So, I only wrote down the top 3 finish for Q3. So Max was on pole, Charles was P2, and then George was P3. One thing I did take note of for Q3 was that Oscar accidentally towed Max on a flying lap, which is super fun because that helped Max. I don't really know what Oscar was doing there. I don't know if his race strategist didn't say anything to him.
Well, he towed, and someone else got towed. Was it Carlos? Someone else got towed. There were 2 people during Q3 that you saw it happen. But yeah, you literally saw Oscar. Like, it was like, ugh.
It was like, Oscar, move, please.
Yeah.
Don't help him anymore. He doesn't need it. So, yeah, that was quali. Cool. Anything else?
No, not really. I mean, it was a clean qualifying, which always makes me happy. Clean starts, clean qualifying. I have too much anxiety to handle that. But yeah, I'm interested to see how much qualifying is going to change for next weekend. What we're going to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
But also just really interesting that I always find it interesting when Checo's not in the top 3. Just because, I mean, it's typical.
I am convinced that Checo's just a bad qualifier. He's not a bad racer. He's a good racer. In the actual race, he's always very consistent, I'd say.
Yeah.
But then in quali, it's almost like he is the opposite of Nico.
Yeah.
Nico's great in quali and bad in the race.
He's not, like, horrible at qualifying. It's just, like, you're in a Red Bull.
Could be better.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. But, yeah. That's it on qualifying for me.
Yeah. All right. Time to get to the race.
Like we said earlier, the closeness of qualifying was not the closeness of the race.
Yeah, I was really hoping that Max was going to stick with the rest of the pack for a lot longer than he did. But by the time, I think I took a note, lap 10, Max was 7 seconds ahead of second place.
There was a 22-second gap between Max and Checo in second place at the end of the ride. 22 seconds.
Yeah.
That is... It is... Listen, it's just one of those things, like, we were talking about this earlier. I'm sure the FIA is sitting here and they're just as frustrated because they're hearing the spectators. I mean, most people immediately after the race were like, Bahrain was so boring, which, like, visually, yeah, you didn't have anyone's car on fire and there was no crashes and there wasn't anything. There were no crazy battles.
There were a few really good passes.
There were some really good passes, and then technically things were just, like, falling apart for multiple people. So behind the scenes, it was just, like, an absolute shit show.
Yeah.
But I think for the spectator, it was like, Max was so far ahead. It was so far ahead.
There was even one point during the race where they had the camera on Max, and we were like, please, no? Like, we want to see the battle that's currently going on right now.
And I know that the gap was, 11 seconds? here last year.
Yeah. So it's doubled now.
So my biggest concern is, because regulations are changing in 2026. Is this just the next 2 years of racing?
Probably. And
that's the frustrating part, is that it's just like, what are we going to do? Like, give Max 3 tires? Like, how are we going to hit? Like, I just see...
Sandbag him?
Yeah, sandbag him. I don't know, shoot him in the knee. Like, I feel like I just see people being really bored if this is the first... Like, people don't even... We didn't even talk about Max majority of the race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's just, like, it must be so boring for him. Which it might not be. Maybe he's having... I mean, if you're just cruising in an F1 car, I'm sure you're having the time of your life, but...
Yeah, but at the same time, like, what I like to think about is, like, last year in, was it Brazil? Yeah, Brazil. When Fernando and Checo were racing each other, and it was, like, the last 10 laps, they were, like, back and forth. And at the very end, they were both talking in an interview, and they were like, that's the most fun I've had in so long. Like, for me, I can't even imagine that Max is having that much fun, because he's not really... He's just driving the car at that point. He's not having to race others other than off the start. So, like, how... Like, you're a race car driver. You're born to race others, and now you're just leisurely driving ahead at this point.
Well, and I'm curious if it's that same frustration that people had when the Patriots were winning everything.
Yeah, where Max Verstappen is the Patriots, or he is now the Chiefs, like...
Yeah, and where it's just, like... Okay, like, and I feel bad because he's achieving these insane things, and I'm sure
that's one of the really cool things that we do get to see. We get to see him break all these records and achieve these wild things, and that was like one of the cool things that you got to see as we were growing up, getting to see the Patriots achieve all these things. But like as a spectator, it gets a little boring because you don't get to see people fight for first place, and it sucks having everyone be like, well, first place is basically second.
Yeah, I feel like they're, and again, if anyone, listening was around during Lewis, was actively watching when Lewis was winning, like, his peak years.
Was it like this?
Did it feel like this? Because I'm, like,
from what I can understand is, yeah, Lewis was winning a lot, but he wasn't winning this much. I don't think he was winning by this, I don't think the races he was winning by 22 seconds.
What are we gonna, is this gonna be his perfect season? Like, that's so stale. Like, and that's such a horrible thing, because, yes, Red Bull is achieving something that no other F1 team can achieve right now. It has ever achieved. They're achieving the unachievable.
Yeah, but they have 2 teams to test things on.
And that is the other problem.
Yep. If you're winning by this much and you have 2 teams to test things on and basically share information, are you really winning on your own?
Well, and that's something for the FIA to unpack.
Yeah.
That's been a huge conversation this weekend, is the close proximity that RB has to Red Bull.
I mean, they literally opened up an office
at Red Bull's campus. I personally feel like there needs to be a level of checks and balances. I think that there is already a monetary advantage that Red Bull has when it comes to every single race. Yeah, there's a cap, but let's be honest. Red Bull's able to achieve things that Haas is not.
Yeah.
And I just... It's funny because every time you hear about it, you hear all these people being like, RB doesn't want to be the farm team, like, RB doesn't want to be the junior team, and it's like, but you're promoting the junior team. I mean,
yeah, we were watching Drive to Survive last night. We were watching the 6th season, and
they're having a charity event.
Yeah, and Christian Horner literally says, like, oh yeah, like, Daniel is going to be going to our junior team. And for them to even be calling it the junior team, it's like, the relationship is too mixed. It
becomes really
blurry really fast.
I think that it is, I think depending on how RB does this season, I think the higher they are, the more points that they score, I think that it is going to become a bigger and bigger issue.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if team principals are already talking to the FIA, because I sure as hell would be annoyed.
I know the CEO of McLaren is.
Yeah, I would be really frustrated. Well, and that's the thing. I'm pretty sure from what I heard, I'm pretty sure Zach Brown's like one of the only people being really open about this, being like, is no one...
And he can definitely be a bit of a talker.
An American.
Yeah.
He's American about it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the rest of them can be a bit more quiet about things. So he definitely makes his opinion known. Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Anyways.
Let's get into the race. So everybody started off on softs, which was like the first ever that we saw everybody on the exact same tires, which is really strange. And then off the start, we see a classic Max move. He just cut Charles off.
He did have a quicker start than Charles. He had a quicker reaction time. But yeah, he was pretty much...
I think Charles knows it by now. Like, he knows what's going to happen.
I think they're all, like, used to each other's technique. I mean... Max has been on pole how many times? This isn't the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just had the quicker start.
And then around that first turn, Hulkenberg actually hit Lance in the back, it was like a little love tap. Mm-hmm. But that turn is really tight, and everyone kind of gets stuck there. But because of that, Lance was spun around, and he had to...
Bottas got involved somehow.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly happened to him, but then Hulk had to pit eventually.
Due to front wing damage.
And he had to get a new front wing, and then he switched to hards also during that pit. And then Bottas, I believe he also has a pit. I don't know. I was a little confused about that one. Bottas at one point did have a 54-second pit stop. Don't know what happened there whatsoever.
Yeah, so
that's the most extreme malfunction I've ever seen.
So I'll talk about it later on, because that happened later on in the race.
Okay.
I know what ended up happening, but we'll talk about it later
on. So then back into the race, it's lap 3. George passes Charles. The Ferraris were locking up, on every single turn, specifically Charles. Charles was struggling.
Yeah, so you saw the lockup, issue with Charles significantly earlier than you saw it, and it got to a point where people were questioning if, and obviously this is not, but people were questioning if, maybe Charles, it was, his headspace, the fact that he's stressed, maybe he just keeps locking up. But then it started to happen to Carlos as well.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, but it was a huge issue. But they weren't the only people dealing with lockups.
A lot of people were dealing with lockups. Ferrari was just the most notable one. I think that they're just going to have some adjustments with their brakes. So we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out.
We'll figure it out.
I'll let Ferrari know what they need to do.
Don't worry, Charles. We got you.
Lando and Oscar both passed Fernando. Lando and Oscar just kind of stuck with themselves the whole time. They were just cruising along together, I feel like, the majority of the race. Yeah,
I feel like Lando, I mean, as per usual, there wasn't a lot of difference in the way they race compared to last year. I think we saw Lando, as per usual, in the lead, with Oscar just trailing a little bit. I think Lando just has a stronger race pace. And, I think that's probably just experience as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I do think that, I don't think that they really, besides all the pit, they really stayed in the top 10.
They didn't drop out of the top 10.
They didn't drop, yeah.
Once they were, out, once they made it back from the pit and, worked their way back up, they were always basically in the top 10.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then we see now Checo pass Charles on lap 7. So Charles is just not having a great race. Then by the time we get to laps 10, that's when we see Max about 7 seconds ahead of everyone. And then we also see Logan go off. Do you have notes as to that?
Yeah, so around lap 10, Logan ended up going off track around turn 4, which was a bit strange. It's a pretty, far runoff that I don't think a lot of people,
end up
run off of.
Yeah.
But some background on the Williams car. So, Williams, up until this year, has had their for those that don't know, on the steering wheels of most of these cars, there is a screen that'll show all the things that they're doing. It has a bunch of data on it, but the drivers need to be able to see the screen. And traditionally, Williams has had them on the actual car chassis and not on the steering wheel. So this year, they've updated, and I believe it was probably just, finance.
Modern
Williams,
technology, finally.
Yeah, Williams modernizing. But this is the first race that they have a new steering wheel, and so they now have the screen on their steering wheel. But we did see Alex Albon struggling with the screen.
And I'm sure that Alex had a screen like this when he was at Red Bull.
Yeah.
But it's been a few years since then.
And if you're used to what you're used to, so what ended up happening
Something I just realized, sorry, before you dig into it, if their screen was always on the chassis before and not just the steering wheel, when Logan was crashing all the time last year, did it cost even more for them when he was crashing because of all the electronics associated with it, as opposed to, because the steering wheel is a bit more protected than the inside portion of the chassis.
Yeah, but think about his legs are sticking out farther than the screen. His legs would have been damaged.
That's true. Okay.
He would have. Yeah. But honestly, people aren't sure if there was a screen issue, if Logan just doesn't know how to use a steering wheel yet. But they were both struggling with I will say, both of the drivers
It's not
were.
just Logan.
It wasn't just Logan. The thing that I'm not sure on, and I don't know if there has been clarity. Why did he stop for so long?
Yeah, he sat there for quite a while.
Well,
it felt like 30 plus seconds. And then he was back on the track and rejoined the race. But
I think it was more than 30 seconds because he ends up having this incident with his screen, and then like Emma said, Bottas has an over minute-long pit stop, and Logan still ends up behind Bottas. So how long was Logan sitting on the side of the fucking track? Was he waiting for a safety car, or was the car just, a lot more, uncooperative than any of us realized?
Yeah.
It just seemed like an excessive amount of time.
Yeah.
So
I almost wonder if he thought, I'm off, that's it.
I don't know, but, man, your reflexes, you gotta,
yeah.
Fast and Furious
Lance
shit.
was quite literally turned into the wrong direction, and then he whipped it back right away and was back with the rest of the race, and then he ended up in the top 10.
But that's the thing that I'm very, very confused about is, one, was this your issue, the steering wheel? And two, why were you frozen there for so long?
Did he know how to put it in reverse?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But
I'm sure that Williams will talk about it on their social media like they typically do. Okay, so then we get to lap 11, and then Carlos actually passes Charles, and we thought that we both gasped as this happened because Carlos was I have more pace ahead than the guys ahead, and we see Carlos pass Charles, but the way that it happened, they were so close to each other that I was it's done for. They're both out. But they were good, and Carlos just pulled away from Charles. I don't know why Carlos was doing so much better in the car, but he was. And then eventually people started to pit, and they were all switching to hards. And I think I heard a couple radios say that the hards were actually lasting a lot longer than they had expected. Mm-hmm. So
I think that the temperatures were not where they were during the practice. I think it was a lot cooler than what they thought. And so the tire deg was not as significant, which was why we were able to see, that's why Max ended up doing 17 laps on his first tires. That's why they were able to go for so much longer.
Yeah. So then we see at lap 14, we see Checo pass George. It was a lot of movement, I feel in the front between Checo, George, Charles, and Carlos.
I feel between P8 and P3, it was just a lot of, it was leapfrog.
Yeah. It was just dependent on if they had pitted or...
Did you see what Lewis stated around lap 15?
Oh, his broken seat thing?
No.
No, what did he say?
Around lap 15, Hamilton states on the radio that his battery was running low, leaving him down on power. So he was having issues with his battery. So now we have...
What is going on?
We didn't talk about this, but Lando ended up...
Before quali, after practice, he changed his energy store already, and then something else.
His power unit?
It wasn't his whole power unit. It was parts of the power unit.
But
you only get 2 for a season, and now he's already used up his 2.
So Hamilton now at this point, so now we've had Lando with the Mercedes, who has an issue. Lewis, around lap 15, is having an issue with his battery, which, yeah, they're all, like, slightly different components, but they're all a part of that same...
Mercedes power unit.
Then we have, I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah.
Alex Albon is stating that his car was too hot.
Every single car that had a Mercedes power unit was overheating so badly because later on, George actually had to slow down, and Charles ended up passing him because his power unit was overheating and his car was overheating, so they literally had to slow their race pace down.
So now we have, at minimum, 4 people with the Mercedes power unit on 3 different teams with issues. So this is going to be really, really interesting to keep track of.
I'm shocked we actually... You know who we didn't see have power unit problems with the Mercedes power unit? Aston.
That we know of.
That's true. They could have talked about it and we just didn't see.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm curious to see... Because Aston Martin, like... I mean,
they were pretty quiet, I feel like.
They were pretty quiet, like, because there were so many other things going on.
Yeah.
But we have 3 teams now that are having issues, so I'm definitely, like, that is something we're definitely going to have to be paying attention to.
Yeah. Okay, so eventually when we had the final pit stops, most people went for a second set of hards, except for Max, Checo, and Danny. They all went for a set of softs, which was an interesting choice. I think that this was when Danny thought that he was going to jump ahead of Yuki, which was a huge fight, which was super uncomfortable for all of us to watch. The team told Yuki to let Danny pass him within like the last 3 laps of the race.
Because Yuki was on hards and Danny was on the softs, and so they thought Danny was going to have more pace, and Danny ended up
Yuki was only 0.5 of a second behind K-Mag, and Danny was 0.5 of a second behind Yuki, and people are like, if Yuki had listened right away and Danny had passed him immediately, maybe he would have been able to pass K-Mag faster, but he ended up not being able to pass K-Mag at all. Don't really know what happened. There was a really uncomfortable like post-race interview where Danny said that Yuki, it might have been because of some immaturity. He
didn't say Yuki specifically. They asked about the interaction and whether he could have passed K-Mag. And he was like, yeah, it might have just been immaturity. But I feel like to ask him about the incident when you know he hadn't talked to his teammate, set him up for failure. But I also think with all their PR training, maybe this is just, like, the way they talk to each other, but I don't know.
It was a really awkward thing to say, and it was just like, oh, Danny, why would you say that?
I don't know. Don't air out your dirty laundry. I don't know. That's my own take.
So, to finish up the race, we see Max win by over 22 seconds, and I think there was, like, one more thing that we can talk about in our final thoughts, because it was kind of a randomly weird thing. But that was basically everything for the race.
Yeah, so Max ended up finishing the race in 1 hour and 31 minutes and 44 seconds. Checo ended up in second, 22.45 seconds behind him, and then Carlos was 25.11 seconds behind Max. Carlos ended up getting driver of the day, which I think was pretty well deserved. Like I stated last episode, I think that this is Carlos Sainz's redemption season.
I'm kind of here for it.
I think that he is kind of that F1 orphan that people always replace him with. Yeah. And I think that I personally feel like he might perform better than Charles, but again, I think it's way too early for me to be stating those things. And then Max ended up getting the fastest lap, doing it in 1 minute and 32.6 seconds. And just for a reminder, that lap record was 1 minute and 31.4 seconds. So 1.2 seconds away from that record, but not there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's it's an interesting. I mean, nothing changed from last year.
No.
I was about to twist it, but like, let's be honest.
No, nothing changed.
Yeah. So.
All right, final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
Okay, something that happened during the race that we haven't discussed yet was Lewis's seat broke.
Oh, yeah, that happened. Okay, so when they said his seat broke, my immediate thought was like, 1, what if something's like jamming into him? 2, what if it like broke and then it's like pinching him the whole time? Like, I'm just thinking, and then I'm like thinking, is there like a crack in the bottom? I don't know. My brain went places. Like,
My
I want a
brain
picture.
went to he is now sitting on an exposed engine.
Like
That's where my brain went.
Like, it's like a cartoon. Like, he just doesn't stand up and there's no butt in his suit.
Yeah.
Like,
That's what my thought was.
It's just bare bottom Lewis. His ass has been dragged along the track.
That could have possibly been a reason as to why he did not perform as well as he typically does. David Coulthard did say during the race that, like, you're pretty used to being very snug in the cockpit, so if you can feel when something like that happens, and if it does, it kind of, like, it throws you off. Like, you don't, it's hard to stay focused on everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely an interesting aspect of something he was dealing with. I think he was probably alone in that I don't think anyone else's seat broke.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean...
He probably really felt the bumps of the track then.
Yeah, I mean, I hope for, like, his sake that his performance is a bit better, you know, later on in the season. I hope that I hope that there's improvements. You know, I really want this to be the final season with Mercedes to end on such a good note.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot to learn from this weekend for every single team across the board. I think that...
I do want to highlight 2 teams that I think did better than they did last year.
Go for it.
Haas.
Yeah, Haas did...
They had composure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that was a really mature way of saying that.
I think Nico would have placed higher if he hadn't had the incident at the start. Mm-hmm. K-Mag came, 11th, I think? 11th or 12th?
K-Mag came 12th.
Yeah. And then the other team is Kick, Sauber, Steak, whatever it is. Joe came 11th. And I think if Valtteri hadn't had the problem at the beginning and then the 54-second pit stop, he would have been in a really good position as well.
Oh, his pit stop. Really quickly, I didn't mention what ended up happening.
Oh, yes.
There was an issue with his front left wheel nut. So I don't know if it was done on too tight or if the front wheel gun, if there was an issue. But there was an issue with the nut. Like, I don't know if the nut was not coming off.
Weird.
So, I mean, listen, these teams, these pit crews, they practice a lot. So this
I know,
is
that's why it was like,
surprising.
why did it last for 54 seconds?
So, according to F1, the official report is that there was an issue with the front left wheel nut. I'm sure they will probably discuss it in the press media, like in the media, this coming up weekend.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I think my final thoughts are kind of...
I'm excited for some of the lower teams, like Haas, like Sauber. I do think that this season, I think, like I said before, I think at least it's going to be Red Bull, Ferrari, then McLaren, Aston, and Mercedes are kind of in a mix depending on what the upgrades do. I think we're going to see Haas and Sauber do a little bit better. I'm interested to see how Williams fares against them, to be honest. And then I think we're going to see Alpine come in 10th in the constructors. At least as of right now, what we're seeing, I think it would be wild for them to turn it around so much. But at the same time, McLaren was in a similar position at the beginning of last season, and they had an incredible rest of the season.
They did just have 2 key players on their team resign.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I totally so they had their, like, I think it was the technical director and the head of aerodynamicism or whatever.
So it's listen, they're a team that has been struggling since last year. They've had a lot of change. I think they're going to continue to have change. I am in full agreement. I think that hopefully the Hollywood investors, I would assume with the level of money and investing that they're doing, that they're understanding of the development plan.
Yeah.
But realistically, it's going to take probably next year that we'll feel that money.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of their key players have changed, so I'm interested to see how they continue.
I would agree.
But I'm excited to see, not excited, but I'm intrigued to see the issues with the Mercedes power unit, how that's going to continue with some of these teams.
I'd like to have someone talk about it. Like, I would like to have one of the team principals.
Yeah.
Or even, what's his name, Sam Collins.
Yeah.
I would like to hear
Like a breakdown.
technical discuss it, because right now we've just heard some stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we need someone to really talk about it in depth, because
Yeah.
all we know is that it's hot.
Yeah. But I think from right now, that's the main thing I'm going to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be paying real close attention to how Logan's performing. I think, unfortunately, we're seeing similarities to last year. I really hope that this is just, first weekend
race
jitters. And then, I think it's Carlos's redemption season. I'm excited to see where he ends up. And for the love of God, I hope someone besides Max wins the race.
Yeah.
But
I think Ferrari, if they can figure out their brake problem, Carlos had better race pace than Checo for a lot of the race.
Yeah.
So I think if they can figure out their brake issue and maybe a few other things, I think that they could be up there competing with Red Bull.
I'm excited.
I am too. I think it'll be a good season once some of the kinks are worked out.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, race-wise, I think technically this was so interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
you didn't see the action that you do of other races, but I think it was really interesting to hear them talk about all of the technical aspects of the car.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoyed it. I'm excited. But, yeah, next weekend is Jeddah.
Yeah, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
So, we'll be tuning in.
Yeah, we'll do tomorrow morning. We're going to record an episode on the history of the track. Our normal, pre-race episode. And that will probably get posted on, Wednesday night. Just a reminder that this weekend is another Thursday, Friday, Saturday race. So make sure that you are watching it from the very beginning. Because if you think that your race is on Sunday morning and you wake up Sunday morning, you will have missed it already.
Or you'll be very late.
Yeah, you'll have to watch the replay, I guess.
Yeah. But that's it for me.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.